Hello again. It's now time for our Ask the Speakers session, and to handle that, we have Ravi Muthas with us here. And back on stage, we will have Andy, Adrian, Matt, and Sean. Yeah, so please welcome them.
Hello. Come on, we can do better than that. Can I? No, not level 5, not a level 5, I want a level 3. Good morning. Good morning. That's level 2, come on. Come on. Level 2, a little bit more, a little bit more. Good morning. Good morning. There you go, thank you. Thank you, Rowan. Okay, can we get our lovely panelists, Sean, Matt, Andy, and Adrian? And I've been wanting to do this joke since I heard their name. True! Always believe in your... No, sorry. Anyway, thank you for humouring me. Right, questions. Umbraco Hardcore, designing for scale and performance, Mr. Andy Eva-Dale. With SSG, the content editing experience is made a bit worse due to the rendering delays. How do you manage that expectation with the customer?
Sorry, what was the question?
How?
How do we manage expectation with the customer?
How do you manage customer expectations?
Around the content editing experience? Well, the content editing experience is still the same as it would be with any Umbraco instance, right? So it's how you manage the models, and we still use the component-driven front ends that map to our models. There is a slight delay, agreed, especially with globally distributing like an item and making a publish in Northern Europe, where our infrastructure is hosted, and the time that takes for someone in, China to see it. I think we just had to deal with that with training. There's very little you can do about that from a technical perspective. It's just the fundamentals of the web, right? It's going to take so long for the CDN to propagate around the globe. So we just had to set expectations from a training perspective. And we also had quite strict sort of QA around testing in different countries and in Azure CDN as well. And again, in front door, you can set time to live on cache and time to live on propagation. So you can configure that at a CDN level to reduce the impact, but you're right, you still do have an impact of the network latency.
I'm actually going to ask this to the guys at True as well, because you've got a you're using components across many things. How do you manage that?
The expectations of the content editor? I think Umbraco did a lot of the work for us. I really did.
Well done, Umbraco.
When we showed Aardman Umbraco, it was just a nicer interface for them to use rather than WordPress. So yeah, I think Umbraco did a lot of the raised the expectations for us. And I think we did the same. We did a little bit of training and said, you click this button, this happens. Sometimes you need to wait a little while for things to appear as they should. But yeah, a lot of the work was already done for us by Umbraco.
And we always like to do just a little bit of tweaking to tailor it. So there's a nice little Aardman logo when they're logging into the CMS, and sometimes we'll change the colors to match with the theme of the site as well. So it just helps us make it a little bit more friendly.
Again, how do you handle things like page renames and redirects?
For me?
That goes to you. I'm going to ask the same thing to you guys at True. Adrian as well. We'll come to you eventually.
Shall I start?
You start. You start.
It's slightly tricky, I guess. There are internal redirect management features in Umbraco Hardcore, but they're currently not being exposed via the APIs. I know it's on the roadmap, so we had to do a slight hack for redirects. We created a dedicated content model. It was a really simple content model. It had a name, and it had obviously a URI that the Umbraco would create for us, and then a redirect path. When those requests came in, they weren't cached via the CDN, and they were automatically handled by Node from a server-side rendering perspective. So we handled our 301 redirects in Node.
Again, Umbraco did a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Our custom solution with the render controller is essentially a very vanilla Umbraco installation with a little bit of true science and magic on top of it. So we try to keep things as simple as possible so that we can refer to existing Umbraco TV videos and existing Umbraco articles and kind of just leverage that. So a lot of the redirects and stuff that happens all out of the box.
Adrian, I've got a question. What DXP was the most fun to integrate? What integrations would you like to add next to Umbraco?
Well, currently in the pipeline we have one for Microsoft Dynamics and a DAM integration.
Nice.
Yes, indeed. And I'll have to stick on my favorite one, which is Zapier, that I still need to wrap it up, make it beautiful, and send it out to the world.
Speaking of making it beautiful, why did you at True decide to do things like change the back office colors to match the Arden colors? And how has that made it lovelier?
It's just about creating those delightful moments, right? I think we always try and pick what we call our gold moments, what is going to actually have the biggest impact for our client, and also understanding that a user arriving on the website isn't the only user that is important. The CMS user is just as important, and actually making things feel comfortable, feel friendly, feel reusable is just part of what we consider our job. So making the CMS easy to use and friendly is exactly why we do what we do, so that we can shorten up the tasks that admin needs to do on a day-to-day basis.
And a follow-up to that, what did you mean by components used as blocks? Is it a doc-type grid editor or a block list editor under the hood?
It's a block list editor under the hood. And there's an ongoing joke in our agency about the word component and block, and the difference between a component and a block. It's a running theme.
What about the word reusable?
Well, reusable is essentially what it says on the tin. You can create a block by the root node in a shared content, and then you can select that block on the block list editor to be reused. But when they construct a page, they have the option of selecting one of these blocks that has already been created for them, usually when it's stuff that they're going to have across the site, and it's just usually around the contact forms and things like that, where they want the copy to be consistent across. They can change it in one place, and it updates somewhere else. But they also have the flexibility to create a new block and change the wording, change how it delivers, change how it looks on a page-by-page basis. So yeah, under the hood, a block list editor.
Okay, question for Andy. What tools did you use to create the React components? Are you using Storybook? Did you have issues with mapping the content from hardcore to React?
We are using Storybook, yes. I'm looking at our front-end developer now. If he's going to start giving a bit of nods. I'm more of a back-end guy. We use Storybook, yeah. I guess we took an atomic design to design our components, so we made sure we addressed like atoms, molecules, and organisms. We mapped them straight to the models we were getting from GraphQL. So it was a one-to-one relationship between the component and a model normally. That was it, really. It kind of, the GraphQL content gives us what we need, and it's fairly simple from that point to digest that into state in the components.
Question for True again. There's a couple of questions which say, can you talk more about how you did previews?
Yes. As I said in the talk, what we're using is initially a content finder, which Umbraco does under the hood. It spits out a URL and does the redirects and stuff. We are essentially just overriding those. We insert our content finders before Umbraco's, and then we've done some sort of obfuscation, API key authentication between our front end and our back end, because in theory you can hit the front end website with a query string and get an unpublished version of the page, which is security through obscurity, right? So we wanted to just step it up a little bit another level, and we added some sort of authentication so the front end can say to the back end, I'm allowed to look at this saved content, let me look at it, and we just return it back in there. It's all built in through Umbraco, so the Umbraco experience hasn't changed. So when we do spit out, we go through Content Finder to a controller, controller to a view, the view is custom, and the view is then embedded into Umbraco back office, and it looks like exactly a copy of.
So you essentially do like a little weird little loop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good weird.
I'm
Good weird.
Well done, that person who asked that question. China. Let's just say China. How do you approach China in terms of CDN? Do you use separate services? And this goes for all of you. So I'm going to start with you. When you approach or doing something DXP-wise, do you have to do anything special when you're thinking about clients who are based in those territories?
Well, I'm kind of niched with the integrations we're building, so depending on how nice is their API, we can see how we can manage it.
Mr. Dale.
I guess obviously we do what everyone else does. We make sure we don't have any Google code in the front ends or anything like that that's going to be stripped out. We don't need to worry necessarily about network latency, as I mentioned in the talk, and the Great Firewall of China and the impact it's going to have transferring something across the globe, because we use the edge network and we use CDNs. All of our backend integrations as well are hosted in Northern Europe, so our APIs and everything are there, so it's not necessarily as much of a consideration, and the only payload we're passing backwards and forwards is JSON, which is fine. So that's how we've kind of handled it.
Pretty much the same answer.
Damn it.
Exactly the same thing.
Same answers. Right. Andy, why did the CO2 emissions drop so dramatically with the Jamstack solution? How did you measure that? Did you go out and actually count trees?
I do.
I expected you to.
I'm going to plant some trees later on for these screens for you guys. I'm only joking. So we measure it using a website called websitecarbon.com, which will give you a percentage of how you compare against other websites, and also gives you a carbon load per page of how long it takes to load. In addition to that, we're starting to look at green ops tools and FinOps tools, which are a really big thing in like the sort of the service provider, like a cloud service provider sort of side of things, where we look at FinOps to look at the cost that we're using for our infrastructure, and green ops normally comes directly with that and give you some carbon emission stats for that. We're also hosted in Azure, so we use Power BI, and there's a free plugin for Power BI, although Power BI license is quite expensive, but the plugin's free, which will give you carbon emissions from your Azure infrastructure. And also, if anyone wants to create a green ops tool, you can get all of your usage from the Azure APIs for services. And I think there's a real big market out there, so it's a killer idea, and cut me in on any profits you make, but there's a big gap there in the market.
This one's, it says for Andy, but I think this is for everyone. I wonder if you could comment briefly on the changing role of the back-end and front-end developers when using Hardcore compared to traditional Umbraco. Obviously, you have a slightly different solution, but I think how did you manage what is essentially an evolving stack and choosing that stack?
I think the evolving stack has
and the role of the developers in that.
I think it's helped developers. I think it's helped front-end developers and back-end developers specialize in their areas, working alongside each other but not dependent on each other, which has really sped up development, especially on Admin and the fan sites. Is the fan sites work front-end can be completed before the back-end, and vice versa. So I think the evolving architecture is only a positive thing.
Well, it's different from, I guess, like MVC, obviously, microservice architecture. Fundamentally, you're not bound to using just .NET. You can code our microservices in Go, Python, .NET Core, Node, whatever we want. Yeah. We would have individual repos per service. We can do individual deployments to each service. So rather than having to make a change to a monolithic system and the risk around that, we can make a targeted deployments to just individual parts of our system. They can scale as well and stuff like that, so yes, that's different. And writing functions is super easy, right? It's like there's Visual Studio plugins for it that have put almost the framework into it. All of the triggers and posts for it can also handled out of the box by Visual Studio, so a lot of that's really simple, and you can still write them in .NET Framework or .NET Core or whatever you guys are using as well. So it obviously changes it a lot from writing a monolithic system to writing microservices, and you have to be disciplined. You can run the risk of creating mini monoliths, which isn't really the answer, so you want to sort of stick to the single responsibility principle, if possible.
Same to you. How's it changed what you're doing?
Well, for hardcore-related stuff, I'll need to refer you to Morten, since he is the person who knows much more than I do. I've been mostly on the CMS.
That's not an answer. He's not here. You're here.
Yeah,
I can't just say, ask Morten.
Yes, exactly.
But that's your answer. Okay. So, if in doubt, ask Morten. Right. Come on. Right. I was going to say, general question, but it was originally asked you. How did you add meta tags to a page for SEO, or are there things you're doing which are slightly different because of the approaches you've taken, or is it just a standard? You've created the page, you've had a SEO block which you share across, so it's essentially a component in a model. Are we saying that's the way you've done it? Or all of you? I'm going to start.
The way that we've done it is it's not a component because SEO is a...
But is it reusable?
Well, that wouldn't be good SEO if it was reusable.
There we go. That's the answer.
So yeah, every page has a configuration next to it. So it's a separate content app completely that does SEO, and we've built an own SEO validator tool that can kind of suggest maybe better things. And then on our ongoing work with Admin, we constantly review it for them. So
has anyone used the wonderful new SEM Rush thing? No? No? Anyone? Anyone put a hand up? SEM Rush? I know Andy might have done. Yeah, well done.
I guess for us it's just the same, really. We control anything that's content-wise from the CMS. It gets published via the APIs. We are responsible for creating well-structured DOMs in React that like drive organic search. We obviously have the bonus of performance increase, which Google rank for search. But there's no real special considerations, I would say, around like a Jamstack approach for SEO that you wouldn't normally make for any other site.
I personally have one question, which is for all of you. How long was your timeline for developing the Arden website from talking to them to actually delivering the first iteration? And I take it you're now working on second iteration and so forth. So what kind of timeline are we talking about?
So in terms of development, so starting from the beginning, it was quite an interesting experience because we actually were pitching during COVID, which was a hell of a thing, doing that on
lots of screens. Hello,
lots of screens,
hello.
people waving.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, exactly. You know, occasionally a camera goes off and then comes back on again and all those sorts of things. And I feel like that was maybe in the July, and we were ready to launch. So we had quite a long discovery because there's a lot of end clients.